What was your most serious thank frick I double check moment? Looking through papers to shred, I opened an envelope and inside was a $2,500 check. It was a week from expiring and according to the paperwork, it was a refund from when we refinanced our mortgage. Student pilot 8 years ago. Got fuel in a high wing training airplane. Instructor is ready to go. I had done the pre-flight before the fuel truck arrived. You can't see the fuel caps from the ground. I was about to start the engine but got out, hopped up on the step, and found both caps loose. I'm starting flight lessons next week. I'll remember this. Was paying my mortgage online and almost added an extra digit to my payment amount. That would have sucked so bad because it could have wiped my checking account out. My dad transferred $40K to his mortgage instead of his savings. He's still trying to get it back. I think this applies. So summer 2010, my family is having the inside of the house painted. Hot as frick. So my parents leave the upstairs window open day and night to let out the paint smell out and help it dry with the hot air. I really don't like this. I'm a naturally paranoid person. This went on for several weeks. We have a pretty big house. One day before I leave to school, I decided to go upstairs and shut the window and lock it. They can yell at me later if they want. When I came home that afternoon, the painter told me, hey, that big bus ladder you have on the side of the house was getting in the way, so I moved it. Hope that's okay. I responded, we don't have a biggest ladder. Apparently someone came up to the house and set up a ladder to get through the open window, but I'd closed it just by chance that day. I guess when they saw our painter coming they ditched it and split. Son ladder. Oddly enough, my parents kept opening the window at night and during the day after all that crap. Answering exams and finished early. Double checked when the teacher reminded us that there was only 5 minutes left and saw that I hadn't answered the whole backside of a page. Luckily it was multiple choice, though. Double-sided tests get you every dang time. I was at a four-way intersection at night when my light turned green. I was the only car on the road and in a hurry, but something in me felt like I needed to look left before I went. Right after I turned my head to look, a car without any headlights on ran the red light going probably 50 miles per hour. Had I just immediately gone instead of glancing left, I would have been T-boned and probably killed. Listen to your gut, people. I look left and right every time I go through an intersection. I've seen too many vehicles blow through red lights. I once worked at a school where I had to look after the kids who stayed until their parents picked them up. Don't know what it's called in English. After school care? They usually had the classic little game where they would hide and I pretended not to know where they were and told the parents that I hadn't seen them all day. Problem is that they would do this with 2 or 3 at a time and then come out all together. Usually, one time this kid started hiding with some others at around 6 PM but didn't come out at all, so he kept hiding away until 7 PM at the end of my shift. Thank frick that during my closing routine I found him in some ridiculous tiny little space because I totally forgot about him. I had about 40 to 50 parents coming in between 6 and 7. When his mother came to pick him up way later than expected, I acted all jolly, but I seriously would have closed off since I really thought all the children left. Not a proud moment. I almost killed my niece's cat via washing machine. I was staying with my brother and his family for a bit when I first moved into the city. One day I threw a bunch of clothes in the machine, went back to my room to get a sweater, threw that into the machine on top of the curious feline that had jumped in while I was out of the room, poured in detergent, and just about closed the lid when I decided to double check the pocket of my sweater. As soon as I moved it, out jumped the cat. Never told anyone, but I made a point of checking from then on. To any cat owners scrolling, double check the following: the hood of your car when it's cold out, washers and dryers, the oven, any large, heavy thing with moving parts. Very recently I changed a light bulb at work in a corridor that rarely got used. A long fluorescent bulb. As I was walking away, turning a corner, I realized the pitch of the hum of the light seemed off. Just seemed higher pitched than normal. I went back to check to make sure the light was on. It was on fire. Dunno if it was the bulb or fixture, but the whole thing was in flames. Light bulb was on though. Dealt with it, but if I had kept walking, building would have probably taken serious damage before sprinklers kicked in. A colleague saved me. I had printed around 500 letters for him, and when I handed them over he said the phone number didn't look right. I dialed it to check. It was a phone sex line. I had put 2 numbers the wrong way round. We changed our number after that in case any customers misdialed. So glad my colleague spotted it before those letters were sent. My previous work printed flyers with the local brothel's number. We thought that it was weird that no one was RSVPing for an event that we were holding, until one of our regulars called to ask why every time a female called the number they were directed to a morgue, and every time a male customer called it was to a brothel. That turned out to be a very costly and embarrassing mistake. Wake up late at night feeling thirsty. Everything is dark. I always keep a glass of water by the bed. I grope for the glass and grab it and am about to take a swig when I suddenly think, no, better check. So I put it down and stumble groggily over to the light and switch on, and there's a huge cockroach floating dead in the glass. Yeah, ma, need you to delete this from Reddit, and also my brain, thanks. I've always made it a habit to double check to make sure the organ blower is turned off after a service, lesson, or practice session. The organ blower is 3-phase, many horsepower, and requires a lot of juice to run it. If it were left on overnight, the blower could overheat and cause a fire. Late one day after teaching, I double checked to be certain the student had turned the blower off after his hours of practice. Sure enough, it was still turned on and the blower was red hot. If I hadn't looked, there could have been a fire in the building that night. That's crazy. We have a lot of heavy 3-phase equipment where I work, but they all have auto cutoffs triggered by high temperature. I'm surprised your blower doesn't. One time I was putting my hair straightener away and I dropped it into the toilet. As soon as it hit the water, it started hissing and sizzling, and I assumed it was because it was still hot. For a second I went to reach over and yank it out, but then I was like, wait, it's still plugged in. It never tripped the safety switch that bathroom outlets usually have because this house was old and didn't have bathroom outlets. I had to run a cheap extension cord from the office to the bathroom to do my hair. Literally almost grabbed a live electrical appliance that was shorting out in water. Go to the dollar store and get the cheap butt surge protector, you beautiful straight haired bastard. I had copied a P-link to send to my BF. Ended up not sending it, and later was emailing my students to update them about something or other. Accidentally pasted the link into the email and almost sent 20 college students a link to Pornhub. I mean, they'd probably just shoot you a thanks and move on. Short term. Printing everything off for a London-Edinburgh trip last year and realized when double checking our train tickets from London to Edinburgh were the wrong day. We still had one more day in London. Nothing could be done until we got to London, but if we hadn't noticed before getting to the train station the day out, it would have been costly. Long term, this stretch is double checked but still important. I tried to give blood a few times while I was in the Navy, but my iron was always too low, no matter what I ate recently. Decided to check it out. Tests done. Anemic. Doc asks if I want to just treat that or go further. Of course, go further and find out why I'm anemic. 18 months and zillions of tests later. Crohn's disease. Since caught while I was in the service, I got a medical retirement discharge, some cash, a monthly stipend, and full healthcare. If I had just got the anemia treated, would have got out while sick deeper in and probably be a world of pain right now. Oh man. Did London to Edinburgh train the other weekend. Figured that being a long journey it would be some sort of special, comfy train. Nope. I was driving a reach truck, working overnight at Home Depot. Another guy had crawled in to move a box. Dunno what the frick he was thinking. And I never double checked, because why the frick would I? Always did after that. If I hadn't, he'd be dead. I was cleaning my room and throwing out a bunch of school papers, old envelopes, etc. I'm always nervous throwing out garbage bags in apartments. I guess the garbage chute seems more permanent than a bin that's collected weekly. Because there were so many papers and I was moving, I decided to double check the bag. I had an envelope of over $1,300 in savings bonds and tips I had hidden in my drawer earlier in the year. I felt like I made $1,300 that day. Veterinarian here. I asked for my assistant to bring me some glucose to inject into a 2-kilogram dog with hypoglycemia. He brings me this vial, and right as was about to open it, I looked at it, and it was potassium chloride, KCl, which is used for euthanasia. Both were the same size and shape, but the one that would stop the dog's heart had a big black stamp on it, so it wasn't so hard to differentiate them. Extra, a professor of mine during a surgery asked for an antibiotic which needs to be diluted before used to inject after surgery was done. The intern brought the vial, already diluted, but instead of putting injection water into the bottle, he had actually put KCl. As the professor was injecting the antibiotic, she noticed the heart of the dog was stopping, but fortunately, the amount needed to kill the animal was a bit higher and they were able to save it. When they asked and saw what he had actually put in the bottle, she went nuts on him for not double checking it before diluting. I don't know what happened to the student. This is always a thought I have when I bring my cat to the vet for shots updates. I thought, that's ridiculous. They probably have the bottles for euthanasia marked and kept in a different spot. Thank you for terrifying me, lol. Ooh, I have one for this. I've lived in a few places over the years, but they all have one thing in common. Spiders, and lots of them. At an early age I learned to always smack the heel of my shoes against the floor, my knee, etc. to knock out any spiders that might have crashed in there overnight. One day I was getting ready to leave the house and something interrupted that little ritual. Came back and couldn't remember if I had checked and was about to slip them on when I decided to make sure, and sure enough, there was one that fell out right onto my knee. But it wasn't any spider, no, it was a freaking black widow. After jumping up and possibly crapping myself in the process, I found it during across the floor and dealt with it. But good lord, the thought of what might have happened if I hasn't double checked still makes my skin crawl to this day. I've been bitten by a black widow. Talk about a costly hospital bill. Every time I'm driving and I'm turning into a different lane, I always check over my shoulder. I check all of my mirrors, then look over my shoulder. Do you know how many times it looks clear to merge into a different lane based off of the mirrors? But when I finally look over my shoulder I see someone is right next to me, especially motorcycles. Always check your blind spots. More of a thank frick I had my husband double check, but anyways. Last week we went to bed downstairs a little late since our 3-month-old had colic. We live in a half-finished basement, and hear a weird sound like the bulkhead door had been opened from the unfinished half of the basement. I of course thought someone had broken or an animal got in, so we locked ourselves in the room with our daughter and 4-year-old son and then called my brother-in-law who lives upstairs to check on it since I didn't want to risk our children. He checks and clears it, but I just couldn't sleep after, which was a good thing since not even 10 minutes after he went back upstairs I heard a thump and sheet metal hitting the floor. At this point I told my husband to quickly go out of the room, lock the door behind him and run up to get our dog, who is not people friendly at all to those outside our family or close friends, to have him check the basement. When my husband went out he looked over to see a panel had come off our furnace and it was billowing smoke and the fire alarms weren't going off. Thankfully I know where the emergency shut off is. To keep this as short as possible, if I hadn't insisted my husband go out again we might have been overcome by smoke inhalation in our sleep along with my sister and her whole family. TLDR. Furnace almost caught fire while family was sleeping in a house with apparently faulty smoke alarm system. Get your furnaces checked regularly. Make sure you know where your emergency shutoff is, and test your fire alarms. Get a carbon monoxide alarm too. A bit of background. First, my university degree was split between two of the departments of my university, the Humanities Dept. and the Law and Social Sciences department. I mostly worked with humanities, with LSS handling about 30-40% of my degree. So, at the start of my final year I got my standard email from humanities asking me to sign up for my history modules for the year. Oddly, there was no matching email from LSS for my politics modules. But I figured that I was probably only having politics modules in the second semester, which was a stupid assumption but also plausible. A couple of months into the semester, I get an email informing me that I won't have enough credits to graduate at the end of the year. What? So yeah, the university's student services had gone through some internal restructuring, and in the process I had become that one person who slips through the net. I had to rush and sign up for politics modules quickly. I was confirmed on them a couple of days later. I was chatting about it with a friend and thought, I should check to see when my first politics essay is due. 5 days away. I hadn't been to a single seminar or lecture. Well crap. Happy ending. With 2 days to go I managed to get in contact with my tutor, who got me a 2 weeks extension for extenuating circumstances after student services ignored my original application for an extension. It was my worst essay of my university career, but it was a pass, so frick it. You literally lived my recurring nightmare. I graduated 13 years ago and I still have this nightmare. Don't know if this counts but had a feeling something is off about my wife's behavior. Checked her phone, never did before and felt weird. Found out she cheated on me. Led to a cascade of discovery ls. As in she was in a relationship with a guy and GKT pregnant from him. Had her abortion while visiting her family. Getting divorced now. Please don't take this as you should not trust your partner but be aware of changes in behavior. Gut feeling is more likely you notice changes but don't want to. Glad to see you had enough sense to listen to your feeling and check it out. Winter here in Sweden. Took out the trash. The door was slightly ajar but the dogs are really good with staying inside when they're supposed to. Came back inside. Sat down. Felt a bit uneasy and went to the door. Opened it and the chihuahua was just there in the garden. Taking a wee. Probably wouldn't have survived for long in -13°C. Did a winter in northern Norway and I almost didn't survive. You could have come back to a chihuahuasicle. Glad you checked. I never shared this story before, so I can finally get this off of my chest. When I was 16 I got a call from a friend who was alone at home and he asked if I wanted to come over for pizza and video game. And sure, why not? After a nice evening of food, games and movies, I noticed that he was a little bit off, and it was not like him. At one point I asked if he was okay and we started to talk about girls, life and problems of 16-year-old boys. Before leaving out, I asked if he wanted me to sleep over so he had some company for the weekend and he said, no, I'll just order more pizza and keep playing at night, but thanks man. Well, went out of the door and after walking around 10 meters of his door I noticed that I didn't close the door properly. So I returned and before closing I remember about thinking I am going to give a check on Ziz. In just 10 minutes of leaving his house and returning, that sucker tried to hang himself. I don't want to share more details about it. Hard to write while all memories are returning about this topic but today, he is happy with 3 kids and perfect marriage. We see each other one time every year and we always cry after a big hug. I wasn't the one who double checked, but I am so thankful to the person who did. Story time. My high school decided to take the senior class to Six Flags at the end of our year. I had recently gotten over my fear of roller coasters and decided to ride the Superman ride. Little did I know, I had buckled my seatbelt completely wrong. If it wasn't for the worker who checks everyone's seatbelt before the ride starts, I would have flown out of my seat and died. I know that moment usually feels like an inconvenience, like hurry up and start the ride, but it seriously saved my life. They figured that system out because somebody before you did die or get seriously injured. My first full-time job after college I was a receptionist office manager for an office. Within the first couple of weeks, I was told to put in an order for office supplies and given a list of what to order. Since it was a big office, there were large quantities of things, of course. While putting everything in, I had accidentally added a 0 at the end of one of entries. Had I not double checked, we would have had 1,000 boxes of reams of printer paper delivered instead of the 100 requested. I do not like to think how that would have gone over being so new at the job, let alone where we would have put that many big, heavy boxes. In the German military, one base accidentally ordered 20,000 sun creams instead of 20,000 bullets. My car is old enough that the lights don't turn themselves off. I have to do it manually. I have had my battery die many times because of this. On vacation in a different state, many hours away from anyone who could help me get my battery recharged, and very nearly walked away with the lights still on, but turned around to check because I had a funny feeling. The ACT when I was a sophomore, I completely misread the directions on the science section of it and went back to the start halfway through and found out that I was doing everything wrong. I went back again and wrote down my last answer 5 seconds before time was up on the section. I remember that part of the ACT, except for some reason I didn't know much about the chemistry, So I did something I learned from reading My Life is Average, and that was choosing AC/DC like the band. Ended up scoring in the high 20s on that section. 5/10 wouldn't recommend that method. Should probably just actually study. I had a job a while ago as a secretary in the Pentagon. My boss got a PDF every morning with a summary of military news, and it was my job to download it every morning and email it out every day to the boss and the whole unit. I was also reading Game of Thrones at the time. A pirated PDF copy. I had a copy on my work computer. One day, somehow my book got renamed to Day's News PDF on accident, and I attached it to the Day's News email. Right before hitting send, I decided to make sure I was sending out today's news, not the day before's. So I opened the attachment and check. It loads, and I'm greeted by the cover of Game of Thrones. I had the default reaction. Would have been interesting to get the Pentagon's input on how to run Westeros and fight off the ice zombies though. Delivery driver carrying acetylene on a flatbed truck. Co-worker had strapped down my load for me before I left for delivery, but I always check it myself just in case. I was able to pop the strap off with my bare hand because it had shifted and gotten some slack in it. Had I not checked, that 300+ pound bottle of flammable gas could have fallen off like a bomb on the freeway. I was rock climbing Apple Valley, CA. I was in a rush and a bit peeved that I had to clean a route someone had already agreed to do, then bailed last minute. My belayer was preoccupied in a convo and didn't check my knot. I jumped on the climb and got a really bad feeling right before I got to the first bolt. I decided to recheck everything and noticed my knot was half done. I stopped and double checked everything before continuing. That moment comes to mind before every sport climb. I also never had that friend belay me again. Not exactly a double check, but something similar. The best man of my sister had given to me their wedding ring as he didn't have a good spot at his house to hide it, and I was supposed to bring it the day they were getting married. My girlfriend and I drove about 2 hours to the place where they were getting married, and when we got there my girlfriend asked me if I had locked the doors, which I hadn't done. I drove back home and decided to get a beverage from the kitchen while I was there and found out that I had left the wedding ring on the counter. After having a mini heart attack and visualizing the possible consequences of not bringing the ring, I drove back to the wedding place and delivered the ring. Never in my life I had such a thank frick I double check moment. The Beyonce. That's an amazing autocorrect error. Early in skydiving day, I put chest strap on incorrectly. Later I looked around and noticed everyone have it on differently from me. I realize if I jump without fix it, I'd fall out of my rig. So I quickly fix it. Working on a 480 volt motor. Co-worker said he locked and tagged out the disconnect. Checked with my meter and found 0 volt. Decided to test my meter on a known hotline and got 0 volt. Co-worker locked out the wrong disconnect and my meter was shot. Perfect recipe for instant death, and I still dodged it. Always do the live dead live test and make sure your voltmeter actually works. Always live test, source test, live test again. But I would not work on anything I hadn't locked out myself. That way, if it's fricked up, it's my fault when I'm shocked or electrocuted. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.